Hey, founders, welcome to another episode of the Gab Lab. This is a show that is designed to bring you financial intelligence that will blow your mind, but is also going to build your bottom line. Listen, COVID did not cause your financial vulnerability. It simply exposed it. And now is the time. Now is the time as a business owner that you take ownership of your numbers and the financial decisions that you make with them. Today's episode is championed by our friends at Community Futures Saskatchewan. Thank you, CF Sask. They have 13 offices across the province to support business owners in building their business and in nailing their numbers. My name is Tanya Woods Richardson. I am your show host and I'm your resident money coach. And today's episode is going to be all about building confidence and capacity for social-based enterprises. Very excited to have this conversation. Our show guest today is going to be none other than Nail the Number Pro, Gordon Holly. He is the co-founder and CEO of Humanity Financial, and I'm excited to dig in. Welcome to the show. We'll see you in the lab. All right. Well, welcome to the show, Gordon. It is so great to have you here.
Thank you, Tanya. It's great to be here.
You know, I am especially intrigued by this episode when we're talking all about social enterprise, because it feels to me, in my limited experience with social enterprise, a lot of these, I don't even know if we still call them business owners, if they've set up a social enterprise and they are the owner, or if they're an executive director of a social enterprise as well. But it feels to me that so many of them have been so busy taking care of others' needs and trying to fulfill that purpose in life that they have forgotten to take care of themselves and their organization. And I'm so glad that you're here to really shed some light again on what they can be doing to take better care of themselves so they can sustain themselves through COVID. So to start off, you know, I was just doing a little bit of research on your organization, and it looks like, was it in 2014 you shifted to a B Corp model? I want to talk all about B Corps later on, because that sounds like a fascinating model in and of itself. But what have you been seeing from these socially driven organizations and purpose-driven organizations? What have you been seeing over the last year? How has COVID really impacted many of these organizations?
Yeah, it's interesting. As I understand it, the move toward B Corp and purpose is picking up speed, and COVID has actually sped up the transition from, I'll say, the old capitalist view, which is profit for shareholders is the primary purpose of any company, to literally, business as a force for good. People are, particularly young people, are starting new organizations, new entities, and everybody's trying to find the balance of profit and purpose. And it seems to be just picking up speed as a result of COVID, as a result of things like Black Lives Matter and Building Back Better. And it seems to be top of mind these days. Mm-hmm. And in fact, I think there was a year ago that the CEO Forum roundtable in the US actually came to the conclusion for the first time in history that the primary purpose of corporations is a combination of profit and purpose. So this is really becoming mainstream. It's becoming top of mind, and I think the movement toward purpose in business is just accelerating.
I'm so thrilled to hear you say that, because as you know, our through line with this show has always been about bottom line profitability, because that's what ensures the health of a business, not at the cost of purpose, not at the cost of people. So to hear that this conversation is actually picking up speed and the dialogue is starting to happen more and more, I think that's extremely powerful. Do you think, was this a momentum that was growing before COVID, or do you think COVID really had a role in accelerating or initiating the conversation?
I think it was certainly picking up steam before COVID. So this is part of a longer term trend. But what's really interesting is that the research that's I think the world was well on its way toward this movement, but I think COVID really has accelerated it because it really, when COVID hit, everybody had to pivot. We had to pivot. We had to be innovative. We had to rethink our business models. The old business models weren't going to work. We couldn't do things live and in person with everybody. So we had to start thinking creatively. And I think that's carried over into this purpose piece, where people aren't afraid now to think innovatively. And hey, since we're making these other changes, maybe we should be thinking about more purpose as well. The other thing you mentioned, Tanya, and I think this is absolutely key, what they're finding now, and this is based on a significant amount of research, businesses with a clear social purpose are actually as or more profitable than businesses without. And that also is accelerating. As businesses are learning to marry the profit and purpose, consumers are beginning to expect every business to have a purpose and to be adding back to the community, adding something positive to the world. And so I go for walks with a buddy of mine. We walk every week, and he works in an investment house. And he was saying that virtually all of the investment firms now are looking at long-term, ESG, corporate social responsibility. It sort of started there, but now it's morphing into people are looking at organizations that are good for the world, that have figured out the balance between profit and purpose. It's not all about the shareholder anymore. And I think that's been a positive long-term shift. It was going to happen inevitably, but I think COVID has just accelerated it. And now we're seeing, all the big investment firms choosing their stocks based to a large extent on the long-term sustainability of the organization. Does it have good corporate governance in place? Is it a good community member? Does it look after its employees? We're really starting to see a significant shift, I think, throughout both North America and the world.
Brilliant. And can you just clarify for me, you mentioned an acronym back there, ESG. What is that? You were talking about investment houses and your buddy talking about ESG stocks or funds.
Yeah, so I think it's environmental, social, and governance.
Gotcha. Okay.
What that stands for.
Okay.
And historically, the markets have always been very short term. It's, what's the quarterly result? What's the return on investment this quarter? And now we're seeing it in the big investment firms. They're really starting to focus on long term. As I say, do they have the right governance structures in place to be sustainable? Are they looking after the environment? And are they making a positive social contribution both for their employees and the communities they serve?
Beautiful. The words that come to mind is kind of, all kind of tied together, but reverence, appreciation, right? Stewardship. And I do agree that COVID, it accelerated that process for many, because in the work that I have seen small business owners do over the last little while, as our world has been in crisis, a good chunk of our population, the services that small business owners, myself included, are offering, we need to make sure that we're solving problems right now, right? Gone are the day of the superficial consumers and we're just throwing more product out. Now it's like, show up powerfully, solve a problem, be of service, have a purpose. And it's really forced business owners to get very clear on what their purpose is, right? And how do all of their products tie into that?
And I think we're seeing, this was part of, the larger demographic shift. And we're noticing certainly in the millennial population that they were voting with their wallets, right? They're saying, you know what, I'm only going to buy from organizations that are doing good for the environment, that are making positive contributions to the world. I'll find a vendor. And now that, vendors are online, you're not restricted to your geographical area. You can find a vendor anywhere in the world, so long as, but the millennials were looking for those vendors, and they were looking for vendors that were doing good things and using business as a force for good.
Beautiful.
So yeah, no, I think we're on a trajectory now where, as I say, it doesn't seem to be slowing down anytime soon, which is phenomenal. For the first time in I think our corporate history, business is going to be used as a force for good and actually creating positive social impact. So I'm pretty excited about that.
Me too. You got me really excited about that. It's a long time coming, but I'm glad it's here. And that really has been a big gift of COVID. So all of that feel good. I know that in the past year, you have also witnessed a number of organizations that you've worked with for many years through this that have felt the brunt of COVID, despite them wanting to be purposeful and making the world a better place. Their top line has suffered a little bit. What have you witnessed there, and what should we be on the lookout for when it comes to either how we're generating the revenue or where we're getting that money from a funding perspective? I know there's lots of different models out there, but maybe you could share with us what you're seeing.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think there's a number of trends that are causing. We talked about the positive ones. But there's also some negative trends that are impacting businesses and social enterprises. The demographics in the developed world are changing. We're seeing older populations, lots of baby boomers retiring today. The chief economist for Imagine Canada came out in 2019, I think, or 2020, and came out with a report that said that charities and nonprofits in particular are expecting something like a $26 billion shortfall in annual revenue by 2025, just because of changes in demographics and lower growth in GDP and other things. And that was just to deliver 2014 service levels. So that's one thing. The second thing, when COVID hit, it really forced everybody with money to reevaluate their priorities. And so in many cases, if you don't have a strong business model, if you don't have a strong purpose, if funders and consumers aren't convinced that your business is the best one for them to buy from, they're moving. Funders are moving funds to organizations that are having the most impact. Consumers are shopping at businesses that give something back to the community. And so I think it's both a real opportunity and a real challenge for many organizations. I know there's a significant number of charities and nonprofits. I think based on recent research, something like 48% of charities and nonprofits across the country expect to struggle and possibly go out of business over the next few years. So this isn't a small thing. It's forcing all people in leadership positions in organizations to really think innovatively about their business model, about their business structure, and I think everybody's having to reevaluate everything, partly as a result of COVID, partly as a result of the changes in buying habits of millennials, and it's just all of these things coming together. I was at Grant Thornton put on a presentation, I guess it was about a year ago, and they said what they were noticing across the country is that organizations that were thinking innovatively outside the box, focusing on purpose, focusing on really meeting a clear community need, and thinking innovatively about it, were actually thriving. And all of the other organizations were kind of getting by. And this was pre-COVID. And again, I think COVID sort of exacerbated that trend. And so we're seeing organizations that are really well structured, really well set up, thriving, and a lot of organizations that are continuing to struggle with outdated business models. And so I think it's really going to force a lot of organizations to really rethink and become innovative. If organizations don't adapt, they'll die. And so it's both a positive opportunity, but there'll be many organizations that don't make it through it. So, be innovative or not, your choice. But the opportunities for innovative organizations seem to be significantly more than opportunities for ones that aren't innovative.
Right. It reminds me, it's that old story of Blockbuster and Netflix, right? Yeah. So It's as it applies here to social enterprise. So out of curiosity, when we're talking about social enterprise, there is the for-profit model, right, where they're still purpose driven, but they might be sharing a portion of that profit with a specific organization or cause that they're passionate about. We also have the nonprofit social enterprise model, and we have charities, right, in terms of that model. And then we've got a B Corp as well, right?
Yeah, so there's a lot of confusing terms and concepts out there today. We've got to separate the discussions about legal structure, structure for the Canada Revenue Agency purposes, and others. So just let me take a stab at a few of these. Now, in terms of legal structure, most organizations are set up either as a for-profit corporation or as a society under one of the Provincial Societies Acts, or as a nonprofit corporation under the Canada Nonprofit Corporations Act. And so those are the two primary legal structures. You can have unincorporated entities, you can have cooperatives, you can have partnerships, trusts, but the two most popular are the for-profit corporation and the society or nonprofit corporation. So those are the structures. And by the way, we'll talk about this in a few minutes, I imagine, but many organizations are now working with complex legal structures. They have a nonprofit to do some things, a for-profit to do some things, and a charity to do some things, and a co-op and a partnership and a trust, depending on the nature of the organization. So rather than just using one legal entity, they're getting more complex legal structures to be able to accomplish all of their objectives. For example, the Canada Revenue Agency really, works with all kinds of different organizations. They deal with for-profit corporations, they deal with nonprofit organizations, they deal with registered charities, co-ops, partnerships. Interestingly, they don't deal with social enterprises. So, and it creates some really interesting issues. Now, going back to the Canada Revenue Agency, obviously in a for-profit corporation, you can generate profit. CRA is absolutely happy with that. As a registered charity, you can also generate profit, but there's certain restrictions. You can only do it with a related business, and it has to be subservient's the wrong word, but it can't be your primary purpose. So it has to be smaller than the charitable work that you're doing. And so long as those two things are true, you're absolutely welcome to build a social enterprise within your charity. Nonprofit organizations, on the other hand, are not eligible to take on profit-generating activities. If you have an intention, if you have a motive to earn a profit, the CRA says that's offside. The only way you're allowed to be a nonprofit is you can do anything except earn a profit. So nonprofit organizations, and these are typically societies and the nonprofit corporations under the Canada Nonprofit Corporations Act, when they're incorporated, and if they file their tax returns as a nonprofit organization, they're not allowed to earn profit. But if you file an application and get approved to become a registered charity, then you can run these related businesses so long as they're smaller than your charitable activities. And there's a few other regulations you've got to stay in compliance with. And this is why many charities and nonprofits are now incorporating for-profit organizations as they're getting into the more social enterprise world.
Yeah.
But it's interesting. The CRA hasn't really dealt with social enterprise yet. There's still some really interesting questions, because in theory, only historically for-profit organizations, only expenses incurred to earn profit are deductible for income tax purposes. So now, what happens to a for-profit organization that has a social purpose that's spending money not to earn a profit, but is actually spending money on a social purpose? technically, under the rules today, those expenses aren't tax deductible. So it's a very interesting, and I'm not a tax expert in social enterprises, but we're still finding our way with the Canada Revenue Agency because they don't have a specific set of rules around social enterprises yet. They're still trying to apply old rules to new business models.
Wow. So yeah, tons in there. I think, so what I would love to get clarity on then, as we're talking about top line opportunity for these social enterprises, regardless of your structure, is each one of these entities, both for-profit, non-for-profit, do they all have the opportunity to generate their own source of revenue, regardless of the bottom line and the profitability? Can they go out?
So again, the ones where there's real regulations and formal rules are particularly around not-for-profit organizations or nonprofits. You can run business activities so long as you are not doing it with the intention of earning a profit. If you do it on a break-even basis, or if you do it at a loss, you're fine. But if you have a budget that says, hey, we're going to generate an extra 40,000 or an extra 400,000, the CRA will say you're offside, you're not allowed to have a profit motive. And if you have a profit motive, you're offside the regulations, and they could potentially take away or disallow your nonprofit status and actually tax you on any profit you earn. So you're allowed to earn unintentional profit. So if you didn't plan to earn a profit, but for some reason something changed during the year and all of a sudden there was a windfall, they're fine with that. But if you have an intention or a motivation to earn a profit, and you do, they say that's offside. You can't use a not-for-profit organization with the intention of earning a profit, which makes sense because they're trying to make sure that people are taxable on for-profit activities.
Well, to be honest with you, though, where my mind goes right away is that many of these nonprofits, I know from a provincial level, having worked with many of them, they get threatened that their funding is going to be taken away, that budgets are going to be, revamped, and that they're going to be cut down. And then they issue this, I don't want to say ultimatum, but they issue a challenge to all these nonprofits, find a way to be sustainable without funding. So I'm hearing a rock in a hard place. And
except it's really, I think, incumbent upon the nonprofits to get some good tax advice and get some good legal advice and set up the appropriate corporate structure.
That's
a nonprofit can do all kinds of things. You just have to make sure you've got the right legal structure and are filing the right tax returns.
Beautiful, brilliant. That's exactly the advice that I'm hoping all these individuals will hear. It's get the right structure in place to help you, right? To help these organizations build long-term sustainability into their models, so they're not heavily reliant on any one source, right?
Absolutely,
yeah.
and it is, and I wholeheartedly agree with you, Tanya. I think charities, nonprofits, social enterprises of all stripes really need to look at how to generate more own source revenue, whether that's from for-profit businesses, whether it's social enterprises, whether it's related businesses for charities. And there's, I think I mentioned before, there's a wonderful organization over on Vancouver Island called the Scale Collaborative. And the Scale Collaborative is actively working with nonprofits and charities across the country to get them to start thinking more like businesses and thinking about how to combine for-profit activities with their social purpose so that both thrive, and so that the for-profit activities can fund more social purpose and more impact. So it's actually, I went over to Victoria a couple of years ago for a conference, and they were there, and they had a case study of a small organization that could barely afford to pay rent to the municipality to operate their daycare and provide a community meeting space. And within, I think, 5 years, may have been 7 years, the organization had $10 million in assets, was running 5 or 6 social enterprises. They owned real estate. They were a thriving organization that was providing huge value to their community. And it was all generated because they started thinking like a business and combining the for-profit activities with the social purpose. And I think this is where, if you want to be sustainable into the future and you want to have some control over your destiny, I think this is the big trend that's going to be taking the social purpose world by storm.
Yeah, so smart, so smart. And I know in business, we oftentimes too talk to founders about start with the end in mind, right? Know what it is that you're building, because then you can reverse engineer it and you've got your starting point, you know exactly what's going to happen along the way. To your point about, was the word destiny? I forget exactly what word you just used there, but knowing what it is that you want to build, right? Even if it's a social enterprise, and having that proper structure in place. So to summarize this part, then tell me if I have this right. It really is about, in your words, it's this own source of revenue based on a structure that you have, taking into consideration that our federal government now, in addition to our provincial governments, we're not exactly sure what budgets are going to look like in the next year, 5 years, 20 years. I mean, this could be multi-generational situation, right? Where we're paying back our deficit for many years to come. So finding that sustainable source of revenue for yourself and your organization, regardless of your legal structure right now, it sounds like that's kind of priority number one when it comes to top line.
It would be for me. When you're talking about organizational sustainability, that's job number one.
Okay.
Not being content or comfortable to rely on where you've gotten your funding from the past, but really thinking about how you can generate your own source funding and gain some control over your organization, and really set yourself up for success in the future. Because as you say, the revenue sources from government and others are at best they're just not guaranteed. And so if we want to make sure we've got the right funding, we've got to be rethinking our business model, rethinking our legal structure, and rethinking how we're going to build own source revenues into our revenue streams.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Gordon. Really appreciate all of that insight here for part one. For the founders out there watching and listening, please join us for part two. We're actually going to start talking about operating expenses and some of the situations, some of the positives and negatives that Gordon has been seeing across this country when it comes to how we're managing those operating expenses through COVID. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in here for part two.